How do you become happy when you hate who you are? My name is Myles Scott, and I was a fuckboy. I was super insecure growing up. I had moved from Connecticut to Georgia. Everyone was so much bigger than me. I was a vegan. I was also Jewish, and I just felt separated, different than everybody else. I was a late bloomer. I was the youngest in my grade. I was a foot or more shorter than everybody else. And I didn't get any female attention until I was a senior in high school. And once I did, well, I mean, if you've never gotten female attention in your whole life as a man and you finally get it all at once, what do you think you do? I know what I did, and I took advantage of every damn opportunity to get laid. I didn't realize what I was doing, that I was validating myself at the expense of women. And as I grew older after college, and I was ready to put the fuckboy phase of my life behind me, I didn't realize that I still carried with me these toxic behaviors and thought patterns that I was unaware of. It affected all of my relationships with women, mainly the one that caused a significant awakening for me. It was the most toxic, traumatic relationship that I've ever had. I was a conflict avoider. And so anytime conflict arose, I would run. And that actually made me avoid conflict within myself too. So it would make me not want to face the things about myself that I didn't want to admit. So I would always be running from the inner work. So just like in myself, in my relationships, I would do the same thing. So she had anger issues, I would run. I would break up with her. I would keep coming back, but every time I did, she would lose less and less trust. And so by the third time when I came back, she wanted nothing to do with me. And that's when I knew that this called for desperate measures, and I told her, and I promised myself and her that I would become the rock in the relationship. That was kind of when things spiraled downward. She had so much pain that she was holding on to that she self-sabotaged. I internalized her pain and made it my own pain. But I was also accepting all this behavior from her because I didn't know my own self-worth. In that relationship, in order to, since I was the rock, I had to put up with everything that she had called me. So any of her projections, I would have to agree with them in order to remain in that relationship. So she called me a narcissist, an obsessive compulsive liar, a manipulator, controlling, and all of these other things that I would have to accept in order to stay in that relationship. I hated who I was because I didn't feel like other people would love me, and I didn't feel like I could love other people. I felt this suicidal depression for 3 months. And every day I was like, why is this happening to me? Then after the third month, a new question formed. No idea where it came from, but it said, Myles, how are you going to become happy? I'm a firm believer that the questions that you ask yourself, or you ask the universe, you ask the source, directly correlates with the quality of the life that you live. So this new question reframed the way that I was thinking and reframed a solution for me. So I started thinking in terms of how am I going to become happy? And I realized that I had been living a lie my whole life. That whole fuckboy identity was a cause of social and familial conditioning. It was me creating distance between who I really was and who I wanted to appear to be. Once I was radically honest with who I truly was, rather than who I wanted to appear to be, and lost the fear of judgment, that's when I stepped into my true self. So wherever you are on your journey right now, I challenge you. Admit to yourself the things that you were once afraid to face about yourself, so you can step into your true self and build a life that you will love.
Myles, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here, Mark.
It's such an honor to get to connect with you. We just, for everyone tuning in, I just met Myles about a week or two ago. Our mutual friend Shreeps, shout out Shreeps, said that we had to connect. And I looked you up on Instagram, and I was just so inspired with how raw and bold you are. And I just love your passion for the cause of supporting people and being whoever they want to be, reinventing themselves, as well as reconnecting to their hearts in this world where we're constantly tempted to conform or to hide behind filters and to be someone who we're not, or who we believe ourselves to be when that's not who we want to be or who we actually are. So
Right.
I love the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Honored to have you on the show. And thank you for being so open and honest in your share here at the top of the episode.
Absolutely. Thank you. So grateful to be here, man. Thank you.
So I wanted to dive in a little bit more to your story, because I know this is your Instagram page, your project, your mission, your movement is all pretty new. So tell us how that came to be, how it started, and what you're up to.
Sure. In my healing journey, I just started writing. I was like, I needed to purge all this stuff out. And over time, it became a book. And I realized how, like, the amount of time that you actually spend reflecting on your journey, yourself, you start to understand yourself better, right? And even like if you journal, you're spending more time, like it takes more time to think about, you know, each stroke that you write down, it takes time. So you're spending more time thinking about each little thought you have, rather than just letting it come through the little ether in your mind and just like poof, right out the other side. So that's kind of how the journey started. I needed an outlet and I started writing. And then I had all these thoughts and they were just coming out, and it became like, I started understanding not only my issues, but the issues of, you know, that are plaguing society right now, with our self-worth and why it's so hard for us to love ourselves. And I needed to share that with people, because once I figured out at least my theory about everything, it's like, the world needs to know.
Okay. And when did you start sharing publicly? Because I know it's been pretty recent.
Very recent. Yeah. So my first, like, I rebranded my whole Instagram on March 10th, and it is May. But
okay, so just like 2.5, 3 months ago, you decided to start sharing publicly.
Yes.
And question for you, just to get a better understanding, because I'm just getting to know you. When did you kind of have this awakening that you no longer needed to be the fuck boy and to choose a new reality for yourself?
It was when I realized that I needed validation. I needed it. I needed to feel like other people. I had other people's acceptance, and that was the only thing that made me feel good about myself. Mm-hmm. Then I dug in, like, why do I need this acceptance? You know, I kept going down these layers of why. And once I realized that I'd been conditioned and programmed to seek out this acceptance in order to find my relative value, it was like, what does that even make any sense? Like, I don't really care what the people, you know, in high school think of me. Like, why am I still carrying on that identity? Isn't that crazy?
It's crazy, but it's something that is so, I think, true and relatable in our own unique ways. And, you know, I know for me, I care about my social status. It's always been something that has driven me, because I felt that somehow my social status reinforced, you know, what my role is here in the world. And I know that whenever I am going externally to get validation, I'm just getting further and further away from my own truth.
Yes.
So that is a lesson that I've learned in my authentic journey. And with that said, it's an ongoing practice, because those external influences and pressures, the expectations of others, those don't go away. And we're human beings. Our emotions, you know, flow. They come and go like the wind or a cloudy day. And there's going to be another cloudy day that comes. So when it does, you know, how do I choose to show up in that moment when I'm tested once again to go outward to try to seek the validation of others versus to feel good in my own skin?
That's a great point. And I think it all starts with self, right? The journey, like, we have been conditioned to find our sense of self-worth from the external. And because we're always looking towards the external for the majority of our lives until we've done the work, we're going to try to find our solutions also from the external. So once you start to do the work and you realize that all the power you need is within you, then when you have those momentary relapses, you're like, I've done this before. Like, it starts with me, right? And then so you go into yourself and you're like, what is it about me that this event is triggering? Right? Like, why? And you start to understand, like, I have the power. And it's all about radical responsibility. You know, taking radical responsibility for whatever part you're playing in any given situation is going to allow you to, it's going to empower you to find your own solution.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And I'm just really inspired as well with, with what you're putting out there. The content is deeply, deeply resonating with people, and it's like really caught on like wildfire. And I was really excited to sit down and connect with you because, I mean, I've personally seen from having a podcast about being real for 4 years, and just, being a human, I see the value of being real. It's the key to feeling free. It's the key to feeling joy and fulfillment, but also connection with others. Right. And it's not necessarily the status quo in the world today. Right. And I think it's really cool how you're putting that content out there, and it's deeply resonating with people in a world where, people are scrolling down their feeds looking for mostly, things that will just make them smile, not necessarily interruptive, authentic stuff like you're putting out there. So I'm curious, what messages are you putting out there that you're finding that are really resonating the most and that people want to hear about?
So a lot of people want answers to their current relationship issues, their current issues with men. Coming from a former fuckboy, I come from the other side of the spectrum, and I can shed light on their current situation. So a lot of content get catered towards the relationship issues with men. What are men thinking? What does this mean? Like when he does this, like a lot of that really resonates. But my goal is because I think relationship advice is just a bandage on the deeper issue. We think that, seeking out this relationship advice is going to fix our current situation, but no, you got to go deeper, and it comes from within. So the messages that are also resonating are the ones where I go a little bit deeper, and I start talking about taking radical responsibility for your own, like how you put yourself into that situation. And it gets people starting to think like, wait, it's not their fault. Like, why am I blaming other people for how I feel right now? And so disrupting them with the truth about their own radical responsibility and their own honesty, sharing my honesty too, and showing people that that vulnerability is a strength simply because it takes courage not to hide. And so I think that's really what's resonating, is because a lot of people, like everybody wants other people to be vulnerable with them, but it's hard for them to be vulnerable back. And so, a person like yourself paving the way with vulnerability, it's giving people hope that they can do it themselves too.
That's awesome. So what has come about as a result of you sharing so openly and boldly?
A lot. Well, it's led me to you.
Thank you, Shreeps.
Yeah, thanks, Shreeps. But also, like, I'm honored to receive the types of messages that I do, and people are feeling hope for the first time in a long time. That, I get a number of messages saying like, I was broken until I read your stuff. Thank you so much for putting that out into the world. You give me hope that there are other men like you. And it's like, I want to create a brotherhood of conscious men. And that was my initial goal. Like that was that's part of the movement that I'm trying to start here. And in order to do that, there's a two-prong approach. One is be authentic, right? Be fearless and share without limitation, and show men that it's okay to do that. At the same time, simultaneously help women derive their sense of self-worth from within so that they can raise the bar for how they deserve to be treated. And then on the simplest, most biological level, men will have to evolve in order to find a mate. And then when they do, that conscious brotherhood will be there with open arms and say, welcome, brother. So that's part of the movement, man. We want to push consciousness. We want to help people awaken, lose the fear around judgment, and not worry about how they're perceived. Everybody's imperfect in their own way, but that's what makes us whole. And so the more we stray away from our wholeness and not admitting our shadows, the further away we get from our true self. And if we don't even question this, we'll grow into our adult years and we'll have a meltdown. We'll be lost, we'll be unhappy, and we'll have no idea why. Because we think that identity is who we are.
I got a question for you about vulnerability, because it's obviously important. We're seeing it, out there more and more. Brene Brown has advocated vulnerability is not a weakness. It's actually a strength because it takes courage, and courage is a strength that I think pretty much anyone would want to be a courageous person. With that said, I think that there's different, when you think about vulnerability, it could be, letting someone into something that you've gone through in your past that maybe you haven't shared publicly before, and owning up to it publicly is a really scary thing. There's another thing with vulnerability to share something that you were really challenged with and struggling through now. So I'm kind of curious to know, as it pertains to your level of vulnerability and your level of openness online, what is that line in terms of what you're willing to share and what you're holding back for now?
So for me, there's nothing that I'm unwilling to share, and I'll tell you why. Vulnerability is only scary when you haven't accepted what it is, when you haven't come to terms with what it is that you would otherwise be vulnerable about. Because when you've come to terms with it and you've accepted it, then you don't have to fear it anymore. And then you overcome the fear of judgment. It's like, I've accepted it. Why? I mean, if you don't accept it, that's fine. It just means we're not aligned. Like, I don't have to worry about your perception of something I've already accepted. I know my own truth. I've accepted my own truth. So if you have a judgment about my truth that's different than how I feel about it, well, it's my truth, and I already know it. So it's like, I don't need to care about what it is that you're, like, it doesn't affect me whatsoever. So that's where I'm at right now. It's a fearless in sharing. I don't think that I'd be able to push the content that I do if I wasn't willing to be that fearless and lead in that way.
So Myles, I wanted to ask you a question, because you're building a movement very quickly. And I know a lot of listeners of the show have their own movements or are starting their own movements. And you've amassed, I think, over 24,000 people in just a few months' time. So I'm curious to know, based on that, I love it because, it gives anyone hope. Now, I know that I believe, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe you can correct me where I'm wrong, that, overnight sensations and overnight successes are more of a fluke or more, lucky than they are the status quo for everybody. So I'd love to get your take on that. Sure. But it's also just super inspiring. So I'd love to know any insight or best practices or tips that you'd share with folks listening to the show as to maybe how they can accelerate their movement.
Yeah. So my tips in terms of Instagram growth or like movement growth?
Sure.
Or...
Yeah. Let's start with movement growth, and then we'd love to hear an Instagram tip or two as well.
Sure. Yeah. Movement growth. So like anything you do, you want it to be a direct reflection of your true self. If you don't understand who you truly are and you're promoting a message, it might not be truly you. So in order for people to connect with your brand, with your movement, it has to come from your true self. It has to be vulnerable, and it has to be raw. It has to penetrate armor. And it has to get under the skin, and it has to move people. That's what a movement is. It moves people. It moves their hearts, it touches their souls. And you can't connect deeply, one, if you're not willing to be seen. And you can't be seen if you're not vulnerable. And you can't be vulnerable unless you're honest with yourself, because that's what vulnerability is. It's honesty. So be honest with yourself first. I feel like I've tapped into a very passionate audience, and it was strategic. When I decided I wanted to help heal men and help them get over the things or overcome the things that I did as well, I realized that men, like my former self, they would not receive my message because they were living in their egos like I was. And anything that contradicts your identity, you're not going to be receiving it. Like, you're like, no, get that away from me. I'm going to cling on to what I know because it's safe and comfortable. And it makes me feel good about myself. So that's when I was like, well, how can I reach men? I was like, women.
Nice.
If enough women join the movement, then men will have no choice but to evolve, in order to find a mate, right? So I specifically targeted women with my content because nobody is living in a perfect relationship, right? There's no such thing as perfection. Perfection to me is just wholeness. It's the dark, light, yin, yang, polarity. Like, so I tapped into the women. They're very, very passionate about change. They want a relationship. They want something meaningful. They want men to be vulnerable and stop living under this mask. And I was living under a mask. And so by being someone that is not living under a mask anymore, who's sharing the depths of himself without fear, they realize there's hope. You've instilled hope in people. And I think that's what's really giving the movement steam. And as soon as enough women are on board, it's going to naturally trickle into the male. They're going to be like, who is this guy that my girlfriend and all her friends are looking at? Like, let me check this out. And so as soon as they do, then they're going to start getting on board. And like, that's kind of the integration that I was hoping for.
Sure.
So yes, it was strategic.
Gotcha. And then I know men oftentimes like to be challenged. So then getting challenged by their women, and look at this guy, he was a fuckboy, and here's where he is now, and that's hot and that's inspiring. Hopefully that will inspire a man to step into his softness as well. So I really love that. Yeah. So what it sounds like to me is really the pain point in which you really hope to help provide the medicine to eliminate some of the pain point that people are feeling, specifically, women in this case, and then providing them a story of hope, which you are the conduit of, what makes it so relatable and so hopeful and inspiring, and I think magnetic.
Thank you.
So love that.
Quite
and
a
then
compliment.
and then the second part of the question was in regards to Instagram.
So you got to find your process and your formula. I experimented with different aesthetics, different messages, the type of captions, everything, right? And then I found a groove. And you want it to be shareable, because if it's not shareable, it's not aesthetically pleasing, people aren't going to throw that up on their story immediately. The post itself, the image, is shareable, but the caption is the meat. And once people read the meat, then they're invested. And the more people that become invested, the more time they spend on your page, the more energy, the more focus, right? So I would say create content that's shareable, find your process, stick with it.
Myles, there's a couple more questions I want to ask you before we wrap up this podcast episode.
Bring them on,
dude. All right. Well, when you say it like that, I'm going to have to bring some good ones.
Let's go.
So,
I'm ready.
What is your vision for love?
My vision for love is to meet somebody who inspires me, inspires greatness just by existing. And someone that I don't want to control, I want to admire, and just be there, and support her journey wherever she is on that journey to becoming better. And it really has nothing to do with me. I don't want her to complete me, to fill my holes. I want to love because I want to love. And if it's aligned, it will be reciprocated. I'm waiting for that.
I like it. What I heard you say is kind of a 1 + 1 = 3 type of metaphorical
Synergy.
Concept where, you're individually, unique people stand alone. And when you come together, you create a third entity, which perhaps is greater, by, also inspiring each other to, show up in a way that maybe you haven't in the past, not necessarily to, fill a piece of you that's missing, but, to help expand. So I love that, and finding a willing partner who is flexible and who wants to do the work and is full of love.
Important that they want to do the work.
Yeah. What is something that maybe you attach to your identity, or something that you do, a habit or a pattern that you're looking to break? So in other words, what is something that you are working on right now in that evolution?
Thank you. So two things. One is evolving my spiritual self, right? I already know that my next evolution is spiritual. And the other one is discipline. Discipline to me is the greatest expression of self-love. And since I'm an extremist, I can lose myself in one and be less disciplined in other areas of my life that need attention. So finding that balance and being disciplined in the areas in which I need to apply them, like my spiritual growth, my family, my friends, my self-care, my, whatever it is. Making sure that I'm applying the right amount of discipline to each so that none of them are out of balance.
Mm-hmm. Two more questions and then we'll kind of wrap up this interview. One of them is in regards to, you shared openly and vulnerably about having suicidal thoughts. And I guess I'm curious to know, do those thoughts ever come up from time to time? Or, do you ever have thoughts that are really deeply self-sabotaging or negative? And how do you work through those thoughts?
I don't have anything to that degree anymore, thankfully. But if I ever have a negative thought, I try to correct it immediately with gratitude. Like, oh man, I don't like the way something looks on me today. It's like, I'm so grateful for having whatever it is, right? This allows me to do this and this and this in the world. There's no reason to get so down on myself about that.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Don't sweat the small stuff, because I know when I start sweating the small stuff, or I start being critical of myself, that's when it creates, the snowball effect, comes in. So I think by, catching it early, practicing gratitude, I think that's a great technique there.
Thank you. Yeah.
And then my last question of this part of the interview is, you used to seek the validation from others, and you really found the peace within, it sounds like, and really focused on self-love. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious to know what you love most about yourself and what you're most proud of.
Mm-hmm. I would say my heart. That's something that I never really had before. It was all about, how can I fill this void? I need something external, blah, blah, blah. And, when in that last relationship, I mentioned how the pain just kept digging a hole in my heart, but I had to fill that hole. It was so deep. I had to fill it with my own love, and it just expanded the amount of love I'm able to give, like understanding, compassion. And I would say that's the thing that I love most about myself, is the ability to love.
Was it hard at first?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Imagine with any kind of new practice, it's like going to the gym for the first time. You got to build some muscle up before it becomes, routine and a new habit.
Yeah. Honestly though, the biggest tension between being able to love myself and not being able to was separating my rigid identity from myself, and realizing that my identity is a lot more fluid than I think it is. And if I can accept the movement of my identity and not worry too much about how I want to perceive myself or be perceived, and I can just kind of exist and let go of control and surrender to it, then identity doesn't become identity. It's just, identity is a label. You are much more than how you perceive yourself. You are much more than how you're perceived. And you can accept, once you accept that, understand your past, and forgive yourself for it, then love, once you remove the mask, love, it's just love. All of it is love.
So good. Thank you, Myles.
You're so welcome.
Yeah. What can we do to support you?
Good question. So my main platform, as you know, is Instagram. If you want to, you can follow me there if you found value today. I do have a Kickstarter for the book, and the book, DTF, Death to Fuckboys.
Love the title.
Yeah, it's gonna launch the movement. So that's part of the strategy. Helping men become more conscious, helping women understand men better, and helping people in general derive their sense of self-worth from within. So you can get the book. It's going to be out on Amazon. You can pre-order it. But right now there's a Kickstarter for it, and that's going to really help out. I'm self-published, so definitely check that out on my Instagram bio. The link is in there.
Check out Myles' content. Very inspiring, very open, very raw, very real. What final words of wisdom, encouragement do you have for listeners of the show to be real with themselves and others?
The biggest tip I can give people on your journey to self-love is you have to be honest with yourself first and foremost. And you have to recognize when your ego is still clinging to your old identity. Your honesty will be able to penetrate that. But you have to recognize and discern what is this ego or is this love? Is this truth or is this fear? And so once you can do that, you can start accepting your shadows. And the shadows that you have aren't actually shadows. They're just projections. They're just things that you believe about yourself that other people told you were, that you believed. It's like, I don't need to be afraid of this. It might not even be real. And then you come to terms with like, okay, I am who I am, projections and all. Who do I want to be? Who can I create? And then just be disciplined enough to create that person.
The one and only Myles Scott. This has been fun, brother.
Been real fun.
It's an honor to know you.